What's up? Woo, Zerds, it's Dev from Mtg. We like it in Magic. Don't worry, that's the only outburst you'll have to deal with from me today. That's mostly because I don't have the energy for outbursts. I couldn't sleep last night, so I've been up forever, but who can sleep, right? I'm so excited. It's like Christmas morning. Not only are we kicking Thronabell Drain out of the format, but we're going back to Innistrad. We finally got to see some Midnight Hunt previews today. And Wizards didn't disappoint. We got to see a returning mechanic that I think a lot of people are going to be excited to see come back. And we got to see some new mechanics today, starting with one that I think is going to at least shake up the limited environment. And based on some of the cards we saw, it'll probably shake up standard a little bit too. Let's talk for a moment before we really get down to some of the cards about the day-night mechanic. That's right, we're doing like a day-night thing. You can tell that Wizards, or more likely Hasbro, have hired former video game executives to help improve the product, because at some point one of them spoke up in a board meeting and was like, hey, let's do a day-night cycle. That's the thing we do in the video games and people like it. And everyone was like, hey, good idea, Greg. His name's probably Greg. But anyway, we're doing a day-night thing. All my jokes have been going way too far lately. I'm sorry about that. But still, let's bring it back here and talk about what the day-night mechanic actually is, as illustrated in some pretty hard to deny that they are cool-looking tokens. Now, the day token at the very top says that if it becomes day or night, or if a day-bound permanent enters the battlefield, track day-night for the rest of the game, which probably won't be too hard to do on the digital client, but I'm probably going to hate paper games of Limited where like one thing on turn 2 comes into play that activates day, and we have to track day-night for the rest of the game, even though like it never matters again until 30 turns later, and that's going to be a headache, but still, let's look at what the rest of this card says before we really judge this mechanic. If it becomes day, transform all Nightbound permanents. If a player casts no spells during their own turn, it becomes night next turn. Now let's look at night, which is a really cool looking piece of art in my opinion, but as it becomes night, transform all daybound permanents. Permanents enter the battlefield nightbound. If a player casts at least 2 spells during their own turn, it becomes day next turn. So it's actually pretty simple to track, to be honest, right? If it's day and don't nobody do nothing on their turn, then it becomes night. Now, if it's night and one of you, either player, does enough stuff to trigger a Clarion Spirit, then it becomes day again. Now, it looks as though a lot of the humans are going to be stronger during the day, and then like werewolves and stuff are stronger during the night, but this is illustrated in numerous ways in some of the cards that we've already seen. We can see a pretty basic example of it here on Tavern Ruffian, for instance. This is 4 mana, 3 and a red, for a 2/5 human warrior werewolf. That's a lot of different types going on. And it is daybound. So while this is in play, if a player casts no spells during their own turn, it becomes night next turn. Now, of course, the turn you play this, you will have cast a spell, so it's not going to transform that turn. But if your opponent doesn't do anything besides play a land, then you get to transform. And of course, if it rolls back around to next turn, you draw your card and then play a land and don't do anything else, then you get to transform this guy into a Tavern Smasher. Now, this is a 6/5 werewolf with Nightbound. Now that means that if you want to, while it's night, while it is the nighttime, you can pay 4 mana for your Tavern Ruffian, and it'll just come into play as a Tavern Smasher. So 4 mana for a 6/5 ain't bad, but you got to make it night first. Now, the reason I think the day-night is kind of cool, actually, hey Ziggy, wasn't too sure about it at first. He has opinions. But I'm just going to leave Tavern Ruffian here for reference, is because like every time a new Innistrad comes out with like transformable werewolves and stuff, one of the first things we say is like, man, the X or Y card would be really good if there was a way to play it already transformed. And they've just kind of like baked a mechanic into the set that lets you do that. There's probably going to be spells that make it just become night or make it become day or whatever. So that's kind of cool. But just with the day-night mechanic itself, we actually now have a world in Standard where we can look at the front half of a transform card and no longer have to be like, well, I guess, if you can play it transformed to be good, but they're not going to give us that kind of support, are they? They gave us that kind of support, and even though you still have to jump through hoops, I think the goalpost now is moved to like, well, now you have to make it nighttime, so it's not totally free, and I want things. Right, but at least now we have a mechanic in an Innistrad set that allows us to just kind of play cards transformed, which is literally what we've always asked for. So even though you have to jump through a couple of hoops to make that happen, I still ultimately think that it's a cool thing. Now, we saw some other transformable cards today, but not all of them follow this day-night paradigm. But One that does, and I think is actually really worth looking out for, is this dude right here. It's Brutal Cathar. This is 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 2/2 human soldier werewolf. And when it ETBs or transforms into Brutal Cathar, exile target creature an opponent controls until this creature leaves the battlefield and has Daybound. Moonrage Brute, on the other hand, is a 3/3 first strike with ward, 3 life, and Nightbound. Okay, so I like this dude. I could see this being one of the few-ish, day-night transformable creatures in the set that you actually want it to be daytime when you originally play the card. It really seems like a lot of these, you want to cheat it into being nighttime somehow, and then you get to play a card that's like much better rate, like you get a lot more value for the mana cost and all that. But in this case, you definitely want it to be daytime because this is the next in a long line of like Fiend Hunter type creatures. The newest one, I guess, is Skyclave Apparition, but this is easier to cast than the average creature like this. So it's splashable. You can put it in a decks that are like 2 or 3 colors, depending on what lands we get. We got some good lands. We'll talk about those. But yeah, this is easily splashable, and you might be able to like nab more than one creature over the course of a game. You play it as Brutal Cathar, get a guy, transform it at some point, and it becomes night, right? And then it becomes day again. And suddenly you get to snatch another creature with it, which is pretty sweet. And in the meantime, while it is a werewolf, it's a 3/3 first strike with ward, which is it's a pretty good sausage gravy. Not the best stats in the world, but since you only paid 3 mana to begin with, I guess 3/3 first strike ward is kind of all right if that's what you have to do. So it's really not a bad card all around, and I think this is going to end up seeing some play. But a minute ago, I said that there are some transformable creatures in this set that aren't going to follow the day-night paradigm, and they're not really transformable in any traditional kind of way. So let's look at Beloved Beggar. So we can talk about what I'm talking about here. Beloved Beggar is just 1 and a white for a 0/4 human peasant with Disturb, 4 and 2 white. You may cast this card from your graveyard, transformed for its disturbed cost. So if you cast it out of your graveyard for 6 mana, which is a lot, you get Generous Soul. And this is a spirit with flying and vigilance. It's a 4/4. If it would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. And it looks like a lot of these are going to have that kind of ability, like we saw Bait Hook Angler as well. This is 2 mana, 1 and a blue for a 2/1 human peasant with Disturb, 1 and a blue. Cast it from your graveyard for its disturbed cost. You get Hook Haunt Drifter. HHD is a 1/2 spirit with flying. And it too, if it would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, you exile it instead. So it looks like a lot of these disturbed cards are probably going to have that in their transform text box. Okay, so I'm still kind of like iffy on the day-night cycle thing and how much I like that as a new mechanic. But when it comes to disturbed, I am down with the sickness. I think this is actually a really sweet new mechanic that's going to replace Escape in a really elegant kind of way, right? In the moment that one of these cards doesn't have that on its transform text box, they know it exiles when it leaves the battlefield for any reason, then Disturb becomes a very good ability. Like a really good ability, but I imagine, again, that most of these creatures are going to have that in their transform text box at the very least. But I don't think either one of these creatures are breaking into standard anytime soon, although I like Blessed Beggar. I like old Double B over here. It doesn't look terrible. I don't think it's super competitively playable, but in Limited, both of these look like really sweet cards. And again, if even one of these Disturbed cards is playable in Standard, it's probably going to see a ton of Standard play because, as far as like abilities to let you play to your graveyard or whatever, this is among one of my favorite things they could have done with that kind of design space, honestly, right? Like, you can play the creature and then it dies and you play a bunch of mana later on when you need a mana sink and it comes back. Or you can mill the thing into your graveyard somehow and then just cast it out of your graveyard for its disturbed cost. There's a bunch of ways to abuse this ability, and I cannot wait to explore them all because I'm a fan of this. It's sort of beautifully simple in a way. But we got to see a transformable creature yesterday that got a lot of people talking. Let's look at Enduring Angel. This is 2 and 3 white for a 3/3 angel with flying and double strike, and you have hexproof. If your life total would be reduced to 0 or less, instead transform Enduring Angel, and your life total becomes 3. Then, if Angel didn't transform this way, you lose the game. We'll talk about that in a second. Angelic Enforcer is the transform version of this. It has flying, and you have hexproof, just like the first version of it. Angelic Enforcer's power and toughness are each equal to your life total. When Enforcer attacks, double your life total. Okay, so a couple of sneaky things about this card. First of all, the reason that the end of that first text box is worded like that is so it doesn't work with copies or tokens or whatever, token copies for that matter, because then it could never transform and then you just could not lose the game. So that would be good. That would be really good. And I guess they decided to safeguard against that. So you don't copy it, don't, make it a token or anything like that, because tokens can't transform, meaning that you'll just lose the game if it tries to transform. So don't do it, is my advice. Also, cool thing about this ability on the first half of the card is that it is a replacement effect. If I know anything about if statements in Magic, that's a replacement effect, meaning that it doesn't use the stack, meaning that your opponent can't respond to this trigger going on to the stack with like a Dragon's Fire or a Frostbite to kill the angel, and then it doesn't transform and you lose the game. Whoops, it doesn't use the stack in any way, so your opponent can't respond to this with a removal spell. Just a fun fact. Another cool thing I want to point out about this card, except this time it's on the second half of the card, once you do get it transformed, it doubles your life when you attack, not when it does combat damage or anything like that. So as soon as you attack and double your life total, it gets twice as big as it was, which is like kind of scary. And then of course, it's kind of a win condition that your opponent absolutely has to answer. It just gets bigger and bigger every turn. It also protects you from crackbacks, right? You swing in with it and you double your life total. And if your life total was high enough to begin with, if it was 5 or 6 and you double it to 10 or 12, then it's very likely that you'll be able to survive whatever crackback your opponent has waiting for you. And if you go down to, 8 or something, you go back up to 16 when you attack, and it just becomes this insurmountable thing, and probably a really good clock if your opponent's not pressuring your life total too much. So I do like this card. However, it's 5 mana. It costs an awful lot of white mana, too. Don't discount how hard that'll be, even in like your Orzhov Angels deck, to get 3 white mana by turn 5. It's not as easy as it sounds a lot of the time. Even if you only miss it, like, I get to 5 lands, but I don't have 3 white sources. Even if you only hit that scenario like 10% of the time, that's kind of too much. This card already costs an exorbitant amount of mana to begin with. 5 is more than it sounds like. For a creature that can die to a Frostbite, it can die to a Dragon's Fire, it can die to a bunch of different removal in the format. And you really don't want that on your difficult to cast 5 drop. So I know it swings for at least 6 on the front half, can save your bacon at least one time, and you can play more copies of it after that, right? So that's kind of cool. I think it's kind of an interesting card against Red Deck Wins, but again, Red Deck Wins has all these answers to it, like Dragon's Fire and Frostbite and stuff. So I'm just not too sure about this one. I think 5 mana is a lot. A 3/3 double strike with flying is really tempting, but we just had Baneslayer Angel in the format. She saw no play, and I know this is a weird comparison to Baneslayer, but it is a 5 mana angel that swings for a whole lot and doesn't do anything the turn that you play it. And in this case, it's really only good in one situation, when you're about to lose the game, right? So there's going to be whole games that go by where that clause doesn't even come up like ever. So I'm just not too sure I'm sold on like how good this card actually is, but the card is very cool, and that's what matters. But let's take a look at yet another new mechanic that we got to see today. And this one is at least on a card that I think is interesting. This is Cathar, Ghoul Caller of Nathalia. This is 2 mana, 1 and a black, for a 1/1 legendary human wizard. At the beginning of your end step, if you control no creatures with Decayed, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. Now, Decayed means that the creature can't block, and when it attacks, you sacrifice it at end of combat. Now, this must have been what Mark Rosewater was talking about when he recently said that there's a new ability in the set that allows them to cost tokens more aggressively. A very, very loose quote there. But, we can make token-producing effects cheaper is effectively what he said. And this is apparently that, because Decay does make your creature pretty bad. Not being able to block and then having to sack it into combat, like, that's some pretty steep conditions. And I hate that the creature can't block. I really do hate that about this ability. Like, what makes me mad is that your opponent, maybe on turn 2, plays Werewolf Pack Leader. I would love to be able to slam this on our turn 2, on the draw, and have 3 power and 3 toughness worth of stats to stand up to that wolf. But whoops, the 2/2 can't block, so that's kind of lame. But there are a bunch of things I like about this card. It does give you 3 power worth of stats on 2 bodies for just 2 mana. That's actually a lot of, that's great. You know, maybe you just need a bunch of creatures to sacrifice to a Plumb the Forbidden or something. And this guy gives you 2 bodies on turn 2 and like reasonable stats at the same time. I like that if you do attack with the creature that this gives you, and then it dies, you know, because you have to sack it into combat or whatever, then you probably won't have another creature with Decay. So this guy will just like create an untapped thing that can't block, but still create like an untapped token at the end of your turn, which is really sweet for just a couple of mana. I mean, 2 mana is pretty cheap for this kind of effect, right? So I like this a lot. I also like the creature types, by the way, for what it's worth. There's only 2 like black wizards in Standard aside from this, and they're both like fairly bad. So this is actually like a playable black 2-drop wizard for party decks. And I've built a lot of like Rakdos party decks lately, and that is actually really relevant. Have a playable wizard 2-drop in those Rakdos party decks and stuff. So I just want to bring that up. It matters to me. But we got another new mechanic in the set, believe it or not. This one I think is probably more of a limited mechanic, but we did get to see what is almost certainly one of the best cards that could go on, and that is Sagarda. That's right, Sagarda. She's still alive. She's apparently the only angel on Innistrad that's still alive, but she's kicking it. She's 4 mana, 1 a green and then 2 white for a 4/4 legendary angel with flying and trample. So it stands up to a Goldspan dragon. Just in and of itself, that's kind of nice. Humans you control get +1/+1, and it has Coven. American Horror Story Coven. Whenever Sagarda attacks, if you control 3 or more creatures with different power, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a human creature card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Alright, so it might sound like a weird comparison to some people, but does this feel like a fixed Winota to anybody else, right? 4 mana, legendary thing. It's got 4 power and 4 toughness, just like Winota. Just like Winota, it wants you to have multiple creatures on the battlefield, this time with different power, as opposed to different creature types and stuff. It wants you to have a bunch of different creatures on the battlefield when you swing with it. And then when you do swing with it, you get to look at the top X cards of your library or whatever, 5 in this case, and pick a creature out. And instead of being able to slam a bunch of creatures the turn that you play your Sagarda like you could with Winota, instead, you just get some value from time to time. You know, you get to effectively draw an important card every turn that Sagarda can actually attack and stay alive to do so. So, I don't know. It just, again, feels very similar to a watered-down Winota that's tougher to cast, but also gets to fly. You get flying. And again, that can stand up to a Goldspan. And for 4 mana, I think it's actually like one of the most relevant parts of this card. You know, at the very least, it blocks and kills most Goldspan dragons, unless they have a Kalane out and they pay with treasure or some like actually fairly common scenario like that. But most of the time, this will at least block and kill Goldspan, and that's a good place to be in terms of positioning in this format. Because if it's not doing that, it's probably doing something really good. You know? Just the fact that it's an Anthem effect for your humans is good enough. But if it even draws you effectively 1 card in the course of a game, that's probably also very, very good. So I don't think this card is horrible. I do hate that it doesn't have any real ETB value outside of the Anthem effect. It does give you the Anthem effect. That's technically ETB value, so you got to give it that. But all things considered, I think the card is like somewhat powered down, but still playable, especially if Standard at large is powered down. Cards like this are much more playable than they have been for the last couple of years, so I'm still pretty excited about it. But we also got to see them dual lands today. Just really exciting. I'm love that they went ahead and told us, like, you're getting better mana. Like, don't worry about it anymore. I know that it's day 1 of preview season. You're going to start building decks today. Here's the lands there. I respect them for that decision. Now, these are slow lands. Some people call them, myself included, but they are duels, and that's what matters. Among them, we got to see Haunted Ridge, Overgrown Farmland, Deserted Beach, Shipwreck Marsh, and Rockfall Vale. Now, all of these enter the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands. So this needs to be your 3rd land drop or higher to come into play untapped. So you don't want this as an early drop, but again, anytime starting on turn 3 or more, you're happy to either play these or draw them. They're really not bad drawing them after turn 3 either, but they are a little slow, especially in a format like Standard, where your first couple of turns matter a lot. All right, so we actually have a few more rares and mythics to cover, believe it or not, before we finish the day off with some drafty stuff. I've switched it up for you. That was a consideration for you. Usually I start with the drafty stuff, work my way up to the important stuff, but I'm trying something different this time. So let's go over some more rares here before we get to the drafty mess to finish the day off. Let's look at Galvanic Iteration here. This is a blue and a red for an instant. When you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy, and it flashes back for 1, a red, and a blue. Boy, do we have a lot of good, like, spell copiers in the format already, right? We've got, like, Dual Strike. We have Teach by Example. And this might be the best of those. Now, Teach by Example can be played in a mono red deck or a mono blue deck. That's a good thing that it has going for it. Dual Strike can only cost 1 mana. So that's kind of cool. But overall, I think the ability to do this twice in a game is actually very powerful. Even if you're only doing it with, like, random normal spells. If I cast like a Behold the Multiverse and copy it for 2 mana, I get to draw a bunch of cards and I get to see a bunch of cards before drawing them too. And then this card just sits in my graveyard for the rest of the game, waiting for me to cast a bomb spell or just like a piece of removal I can double up, I got 5 mana. I'll copy a Dragon's Fire and kill 2 things late in the game. Like, it actually seems like really decent, the fact that it just sits in your graveyard and allows you to just cast it with flashback. Something cool about this too. This is probably another card that really benefits from being milled into your graveyard in some way or another, right? Like, you don't even have to cast it the first time for it to be really dangerous, because once it's in your graveyard, it's effectively in your hand, and 3 mana is not actually that much to ask for this effect late in the game, when it can copy some pretty heinous stuff depending on how much mana you have. But let's take a look at another werewolf here, and this actually may be one of the better cards of the day. This is Tovolar. Is it Toblerone, Dire Overlord. This is 3 mana, 1, a green, and a red for a 3/3 legendary human werewolf. Whenever a wolf or werewolf you control deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more wolves and or werewolves, it becomes night. Then transform any number of human werewolves you control. Daybound. Now, there's no way I'm saying that right. Tovolar, the Midnight Scourge, is a 4/4 legendary werewolf, and whenever a wolf or werewolf you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So both sides of the card have this ability. But it also just has a Kessig Wolf run built into this half of it. You can pay X, a red and a green, to have a wolf or a werewolf you control. Get plus X plus 0 and gain trample until end of turn. And of course, this card is Nightbound. A couple of interesting little design things I like about this. The first one being that if you do transform it into the Kessig Wolf Run version of the card, then the Kessig Wolf Run activated ability gives you something to do with your mana on your turn, so you're not casting a bunch of spells and inadvertently making it day again when you don't really want to do that. So, again, you need a mana sink when it's nighttime, and this is an amazing mana sink, trust me. I wish they would just reprint Kessig Wolf Run, but it might be too good, honestly. That card was bonkers. But the ability to not only boost a creature by a lot, depending on how much mana you have, but give it trample, which is the real key to this card, is actually kind of just bust through stalemates. You can do it at instant speed, so if a wolf goes unblocked or gets a weak block even, you just send it through with trample. It's got 10 power, all of a sudden, whoops, I win. It's just such a sick. Kessig Wolf Run is so sick, and it being sort of an activated ability on this is very good. It doesn't even have to tap to do it, so if you have enough mana, you can do this to 2 creatures, which is kind of good in its own right, if you have to do it with 2 creatures. But most of the time, you just pump all your mana into one dude, give it trample, and your opponent dies. All of a sudden. It's weird. So I really love the second half of this card, but I love the first half too. To be honest, right, this is a way to cheat things into nighttime without having to I'm going to play this card, and then I have to sit around until my next turn, and then I can't do anything on my next turn. And then it becomes you don't have to give your opponent 2 turns, effectively, to turn it into night because of this card. You just play it, it's your 3rd wolf or werewolf, and then at the end of your turn, boom, night, or at the beginning of your upkeep, night. So that is good. Just that in and of itself is really, really sweet. Plus, when you do transform this, or when it becomes night, you get to transform whatever humans you want to. So that's pretty sweet as well. It's just, I don't know, just an interesting little card that, even though I don't think the stats are super amazing, right? At 3 mana right now, I think we want more than a 3/3 with no real great keyword abilities, at least on the front half. And then, you have to do all this work to transform it into a 4/4. So again, the stats aren't incredible on this, but I do think some of the play patterns will be really good. But next, let's look at Light Up the Night. This is the newest card of the day as I record this. I just refreshed Mythic Spoiler and it popped up. This is X and a red for a sorcery. Light Up the Night deals X damage to any target. It deals X plus 1 damage instead if that target is a creature or a planeswalker. Flashback, 3 and a red, remove X loyalty counters from among planeswalkers you control. If you cast a spell this way, X can't be 0. So, kind of cool that you still have to pay 4 freaking mana to flash it back and probably kill or almost kill one of your own planeswalkers. But some of the time, that's going to be worth it for a removal spell or the spell that just ends the game. I really like how elegant this kind of is. You know, it's just a fireball. It's a red and X. Deal X damage to a thing, but it's even better than that, right? It's just the usual fireball, pump 11 mana into it, hit your opponent for 10. That's like not terrible in and of itself, but if you just pay 1 for this, you're hitting a creature or planeswalker for 1. If you pay 2 for this, it's a shock or a bone crusher giant. I think that Stomp is a better example here. You know, if you pay 3 for it, it does 3 damage. So this is always going to be like at least okay. It sucks at its sorcery speed, but I do like a flexible fireball that can flash back. And I also like the alliteration there. But let's look at probably the card that people are most hyped about so far, and that's Arlinn. I'm hyped because I get to make King of the Hill jokes again, but that said, this girl ain't right, quite, right? I just don't think that this is the power level I want it to be, but a lot of people are speculating the card is pretty good. What does it do? Arlinn Pax Hope is 4 mana, 2 a red and a green for a 4 loyalty Arlinn Planeswalker with Daybound. You +1 it, and hey, until your next turn here, you may cast creature spells as though they had flash, and each creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. You can -3 to create 2/2/2 green wolf creature tokens. Now, Arlinn the Moon's Fury is Nightbound and is a 4 loyalty walker as well. You can +2 it to add a green and a red, or if you pay 0, until end of turn, Arlinn becomes a 5/5 werewolf creature with trample, indestructible, and haste. Alright, so I have to immediately compare this to Esika's Chariot, and Esika's Chariot also gives you 2/2 creatures. However, it is arguably a little harder to kill than an Arlinn. You can't just attack into an Arlinn, you know, a Chariot, is the word I'm looking for, and just kill it. You can in this case, so I'm not super sure that this is better than Chariot in Standard. Although it might play alongside Chariot in Standard because it creates these wolf tokens, and then maybe Chariot can copy those a little later in the game. You got some cats and some wolves going on. It's a nice little household you got going, so that's cool. But, you know, is it better to leave behind an artifact with your 2/2s, or is it better to leave behind a planeswalker with your 2/2s? That is kind of the question. I will say, once this becomes Nightbound, and it can attack as like an just about impossible to kill, like, big creature, that's really not terrible. And there's going to be turns where you can probably find some use for the mana on this, too. If it's already night when you play the card, then you're paying 4 mana for a 5/5 indestructible that you're not even really paying 4 mana for, right? If it's nighttime, you pay 4 for it. It comes down as its transformed version, and you can immediately get 2 mana back. So you're kind of only paying 2 mana. And by the way, Bard class is a card that exists. So you could just pay this, play this for 2 mana in the first place. And then it pays you right back by getting you a red and a green, which is what you paid for it. So, I think the card is really good in Bard class. Let me say that much. But I also think the card is probably decent in Wolf and Werewolf decks in Standard. And we're going to be building plenty of those on the channel, I'm sure. So you want to play it there. But, when you're looking at, like, competitive decks for Standard that you want to build, I do think you, in a lot of cases, because you can't play all the 4-drops in the world, probably going to have to make a choice between this and Esika's Chariot. But end of the day, it might be a 2-2 or 3-1 split, and we end up playing some Arlins in the decks that can access red mana, because the card isn't terrible. But you know what else isn't terrible? That's Sereth the Viper's Fang. It's not great either, but it's not terrible. It's 4 mana, 2 and 2 green for a 3/4 legendary human warlock. Other tapped creatures you control have Death Touch, so it works pretty well with Finn. Probably, I imagine. That's an easy call to make. Other untapped creatures you control have Hexproof. That's the better ability. You can pay 1 and tap Sereth, that's her name, to untap another target creature or land that you control. Okay, so you can attack him with a creature, and then if your opponent has any sort of like weird tricks they want to do, you can tap your Seraph, untap the thing they targeted to give it hexproof at instant speed while there are removal spells on the stack. That's actually really sweet. You can also just untap your Cradle in Commander, which is pretty sweet, but I'd rather have this in the 99 than as my commander, because I like to play commanders that tap to do stuff, like Marieki Rebarrett is one of my favorite commanders. I guess you can't play this in Marieki, but still, commanders that tap to do a thing are among my favorite commanders. Commanders with a fun activated ability. And if this is in the 99, then it can untap your commander. But in Standard, I guess this untaps like Circle of the Moon Druid or whatever it's called. The thing that taps for Gia's Cradle. Right? So untapping that in Standard seems pretty good on certain board states, right? So I want to live the dream, but all in all, I'm not sure this is great for Standard, but the moment you drop it, untapped creatures you control have hexproof is actually probably really good. If I had to guess, it's probably great. But let's keep it breezy and go through all the draft commons and uncommons from today. But some of these are playable in more competitive environments. Like, for instance, Defenestrate. I love that this is finally a word on a card. I've known that Defenestrate means throw fools out the window for like 15 years. I thought I was one of the only people that knew this word, but Wizards knows it. They're going to make it a card. Defenestrate is 3 mana, 2 and a black for an instant, that is also common. Destroy target creature without flying. So this could see a fair amount of Pauper play and maybe even Standard play, but I think 3 mana, even at instant speed, is a little much to pay for a vastly unconditional spell that misses some very important targets in Standard. So I'm not sure it sees much play there, but it's fairly costed for what it's worth. But let's keep it going with Famished Foragers. This is 4 mana, 3 and a red for a 4/3 vampire, and when it ETBs, if an opponent lost life this turn, you add 3 red mana. You can pay 2 and a red and discard a card to draw a card. Thus, note how well it synergizes with itself. You can ETB, you get the 3 mana, and then you immediately cash that in to Rummage. So that could be kind of cool. Or you could just spend the 3 mana on something else. I'm a big fan of Ardent Electromancer, and I can't seem to get that card to work. But this one, probably way easier to get work, but still not an amazing card. But any card that just gives you free mana when it ETBs is probably worth multiple looks. But, there are cards that definitely aren't worth a whole bunch of looks, like Storm Rider Spirit, 4 and a blue for a 3/3 spirit with flash and flying, and that's all the card does. We've seen that before. Here's Brimstone Vandal, though. This is 2 and a red for a 2/3 Devil with Menace. If it's neither day nor night, it becomes day as Brimstone Vandal enters the battlefield. Whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, Brimstone Vandal deals 1 damage to each opponent, which all that kind of sounds confusing, but it ends up being kind of really sweet, especially if there's a way to switch back from day and night like really easily all in the same turn. There could even potentially be an infinite combo lurking in this set somewhere, but I highly doubt that. This is probably just unlimited going to do a few damage over the course of a game to your opponent, and that's actually not bad. Could be worse. We move on to Arrogant Outlaw. This is 3. It makes me want to sing for summer. Arrogant Outlaw. It's not a song. But it makes me want to sing, and I don't know why. This is 3 mana, 2 and a black for a 3/2 Vampire Noble that when it ETBs, if an opponent lost life this turn, each opponent loses 2 and you gain 2. So it appears as though your opponent losing life is a kind of sub-theme for vampires in this set, and I kind of like that. If we see some like really aggressively costed vampires, it's cool, but this probably won't see much play. It's not very impressive. So let's move on to Dawnheart Rejuvenator. This is 4 mana, 3 and a green for a 2/4 human warlock. When it ETBs, you gain 3 life. You can tap it for a mana of any color. So sweet little limited piece here, but 4 mana is a lot for Standard, so I won't see any play there. But it's fine. It's a fine card for limited. Might of the Old Ways is 1 and a green for an instant that gives a creature +2/+2 till end of turn. And it has Coven. If you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, you draw a card. So that's one of in your limited deck. Candlelit Cavalry is 5 mana, 4 and a green for a 5/5 human knight with Coven. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control 3 or more creatures with different power, Candlelight Cavalry gains trample till end of turn. So 5 mana, 5/5, sometimes trample again in limited. That's worth a common slot some of the time in your aggressive deck. Candle Trap is interesting, though. This is just 1 white mana for an aura that enchants a creature. Enchanted creature has Defender. Prevent all combat damage that will be dealt by enchanted creature. This This also has Coven. You can pay 2 and a white and sacrifice Candle Trap, exile enchanted creature. Activate only if you control 3 creatures with different powers. So this, again, this is actually kind of one of my favorite Coven cards so far. But I'm not sure this actually ends up seeing any play whatsoever, but it is kind of really, really sweet flavor that you can tie the creature down with candle wraps of some kind, and then actually do the ritual once you have the mana to do it. I like the flavor, and I think it's a cool removal piece in Limited, but there's probably better options in Standard, even at the relatively low starting cost. Hope you stuck around for Secrets of the Key. This is just 1 blue mana for an instant that investigates, ladies and gentlemen. If this spell was cast from her graveyard, you investigate twice instead. It has flashback 3 and a blue, so they just threw 2 fan favorite mechanics together from Innistrad. I don't know if a card gets much more Innistrad than this, but I guess it doesn't have any werewolves on it. So how Innistrad could it actually be? But yeah, investigate for 1 blue mana at instant speed is not amazing, actually. It could be better. It really could, because you actually have to pay like 3 mana to actually draw the card off of it. So, again, it could be better, but could be worse too, especially if your deck wants tokens on the battlefield, it wants artifacts on the battlefield for whatever reason, it's counting these permanent types. A card like this could be really good, and by the end of things, it's going to give you a total of 3 clues. So I kind of like this card more than I want to, but I don't think it beats out cards like Behold the Multiverse. We also saw some lower grade wolf stuff today, like Howl of the Hunt, 3 mana, 2 and a green for an aura with flash that enchants a creature. When Howl of the Hunt enters the battlefield, if enchanted creature is a wolf or werewolf, untap that creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and has vigilance, so it's an aura. It's kind of bad. It's cool that it has flash, you can play it as a combat trick, but I don't know, maybe that does save it a little bit. Like in an aggressive, green-based deck in Limited, maybe you play a copy of this just because it's flash, so combat trick where the boon stays on is pretty sweet, but 3 mana is kind of steep for this effect, especially in a deck that doesn't want to hold up mana most of the time, so talking myself out of it. So let's move on to Snarling Wolf here. This is just a single green mana for a 1/1 wolf. You can pay 1 and a green, and it gets +2/+2 till end of turn. Bad news is you can only do that once a turn, but when your 1-drop in your wolf deck has the ability to be a 3/3 and a decent mana sink later in the game, or even in the mid-game, I guess it could be worse. I don't want to play this in Standard as my 1-drop in the wolf deck, just to go on record, but if I have to, I will, and will acknowledge that it could be worse. However, I don't really want to play Pestilent Wolf in the 2-drop slot. We already have Werewolf Pack Leader. I think that there couldn't be a greater power divide between 2 cards. Pestilent Wolf is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 2/2 wolf, and it has 2 and a green. It gains Death Touch till end of turn. So, again, in Limited, this is fine. It's a bread and butter. It's a bear, right? In case you don't know what that means. 2 mana, 2/2 in Limited, which is usually playable enough, if only to fill out your curve, especially in aggressive decks. And then later in the game, it can threaten to, kill a thing that blocks it. It can hold off the big thing from attacking. So, not a terrible card in that environment, but again, obviously, sees no play outside of that. We also got a reprint of Unruly Mob today. If you care about that, then good for you. Unruly Mob is sweet, actually. A bunch of Limited games are I remember games of Duels of the Planeswalkers 2014, I think it was, on PlayStation 3, where Unruly Mob would get a 12/12. Just an unstoppable beast of a card. If we get some easy, quick, cheap, free even ways to sacrifice creatures, Unruly Mob could be good, but the last few times this was printed, it wasn't really good enough to see much Standard play, especially in the face of all the really abusable stuff Aristocrats was doing, so I doubt it sees much play this time either in competitive Standard, but it's always a neat card to have access to in Limited. That was Ziggy jumping from the tower of my computer to the cat tree and scaring the crap out of me. My computer rocked a little bit. That was not pleasant. But we'll move on to what is so far the final card of the day, and that is Festival Crasher, everybody. This is just a 2-mana devil. 1 and a red for a 1/3 double. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn, which is actually not bad. I don't think it's Standard playable. It's not like Kiln Fiend or anything, but it is still kind of really good. Again, especially in Limited, but I hate to keep saying it, but that's what this section of the video is for. So for people who want to see every single card from the day, and especially Limited players who will actually derive a good amount of value from this portion of the video, right? I actually think this card is really sweet. Again, it's not Kiln Fiend, but I always appreciate cheap spell-centered creatures like this, and you know, in your budget spells deck, if this does get through, it threatens to deal a buttload of combat damage you can spell if you can play a couple of spells. So, again, I always appreciate creatures like this, especially when they are as budget as this. So, big fan of this. Not saying it'll see too much competitive play, but it will be fun if the archetype is open to play in limited. All right, so I think we finally made it through. They just kept releasing cards. As I was recording this video, they released like 6, 12, they released 12 cards in the middle of me recording this. So at one point I thought that this was some sort of, you know, Groundhog Day or just hell loop of some kind where they would never stop releasing cards and I'd be here on the couch covering them all day. But is that hell or is that heaven? I'm not actually sure. But one thing I know is that I got to get some sleep because my analogies are getting delirious at this point. So let me edit this video and I'll have it out for you. But in the meantime, make sure you like, subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications. It is officially preview season. So if you hadn't hit the bell for the notes yet, like, go ahead and do that. It's time. We're doing it. We're looking at new cards. So let me know how you felt about all these in the comments section. Any decks you're looking forward to building or any ideas that you might have. You know, any interactions or combos that maybe I didn't bring up. These cards are all still very fresh. So I haven't like cheated and looked at Reddit for combos. none of that stuff. So let me know if there's anything that you've dreamt up that we haven't seen yet down there in the comments section. Aside from that, do all this stuff. You can support the channel on Patreon for just $1 a month, and it really, really helps out. And I've been working myself to the point of exhaustion and absolutely no sleep lately. Don't you want to reward that? Isn't this a meritocracy? I've been told it is. Anyway, $1 a month, support the channel. And then watch me play Magic on Twitch. And also during the spoiler season, I'll be getting on Twitch to discuss some of these spoilers, especially on the weekend nights. So might be a good time to follow on Twitch. You haven't done that yet. And you want to see all the spoiler content. But I think that's all of my self-promotion. I guess follow me on Twitter. Do that. But I think I'm done with that part of the video. I gotta edit this stinking thing. What are we, half an hour in at this point? It was a big day of spoilers. So let me get onto the computer box and finish this thing off for you guys. I love you all. I am Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.